Hey everyone, welcome to the FF in the Six podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Bandu, and with me is my main man, Johnny Shermer. This is episode 4 of the podcast. We're going to be looking at week 10 games that happened on Sunday, and we're going to go over some of the guys that you got to start, sit, some of the key injuries that have happened. So let's dive on into it. We're going to go over who we said to start. Last week, I was saying, to start Carson Wentz against the New York Giants. That did not go as planned. The game before Carson Wentz had played the Giants, he scored 27 fantasy points. But on Sunday, he had kind of a really bad game. I'm sorry if you had started him in your lineup. He was 21 of 37 with 208 yards. He had 2 rushes for 4 yards. He was sacked 3 times, and he scored a total of 4.83 fantasy points. So that's my bad for that one. And the other guy that I was saying to start was Jared Goff versus Seattle. He was 27 of 37 for 302 yards. He had 5 rushes for 4 yards. He was sacked 3 times, and he had a fumble. Scored 7.47 points. Johnny, did you happen to take a look at any of these games on Sunday with Jared Goff and Carson Wentz?
Yeah, I did. I actually started Jared Goff in one of my leagues, and to my surprise, he did terrible. They going up against the Seattle Seahawks, they allow like 350 passing yards a game, and Goff loves to throw the ball. So you'd expect him to get, at least 20 plus points. But I think all of their touchdowns were rushing touchdowns. So Goff didn't get too many points there. And then, yeah, like you said with Wentz, he did really well week 7 or whatever when they played the Giants. But this week, it wasn't looking too good. It looked like the Giants caught on to what they were doing, and Giants really played well.
Yeah, it was kind of weird because you see every team that Seattle has played against, like every quarterback has pretty much thrived against that defense, and Jared Goff just couldn't find the end zone, and it was just mainly tailored towards the run game. Carson Wentz, big surprise there because the Eagles having some receivers come back from injury, like Alshon Jeffrey and Jalen Rieger. You would think that they would kind of go with the same game plan, but nope. It was kind of like Miles Sanders show Boston Scott. Like it was the more of a running game for both of these quarterbacks. Like big surprise there.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like the Rams are that team that can really win against anyone, and they can lose against anyone.
Oh yeah, for sure. Who'd you have for your sits there?
All right, so first off, we'll start with well, actually, both of them were in the 8 p.m. game last night. First off, Cam Newton, he did okay. He actually did better than I thought he would against that tough Baltimore defense. Went 13 for 17, only 118 passing yards, which isn't great, obviously. 11 rushes for 21 yards with 1 passing touchdown and 1 rushing touchdown. He was sacked once. He ended up scoring 17.53 fantasy points. But yeah, like I said, he did a lot better than I thought he would. And going to the other side of the field, Lamar Jackson, same thing. He did a lot better than I would. He's a very trendy quarterback, to say the least, this season. You don't really know what he's going to do. He went 22 for 34, 249 yards, had 55 yards on the rush, 2 passing touchdowns. He was sacked 2 times with 1 interception. With that interception, he actually did score 22.3 fantasy points. So I'm gonna have to give myself a yikes for that one. But did you check out that game last night?
Yeah, I watched the game last night, and I was kind of worried about having Lamar starting against New England. He was my quarterback option because I had Matt Ryan on bye, so Lamar was my starting quarterback there, and was a little worried with how the game would go just because of some of the previous games Lamar has had, but kind of did pretty well in my opinion with the 22.3 points. I know he would much rather prefer the win, but I'll take the fantasy points from Lamar, and hopefully I can bounce back this week with Justin Jefferson having a big game tonight against the Chicago Bears. But some of the running backs that I was saying to start from last week, we'll go with the one that was a big yikes. It was Melvin Gordon versus the Las Vegas Raiders. He had 11 carries for 42 yards, and he was only targeted 2 times. He didn't catch any of those targets. He scored a total of 4.6 fantasy points. Not a great game at all for Melvin Gordon. The game plan just got completely thrown out the window. With Drew Lock having 5 turnovers that game, it was just very horrible against these Raiders. And then the next guy that I had was J.D. McKissick versus Detroit. He only had 8 carries for 6 yards, but he did have a rushing TD, and he was targeted 15 times, and he had 7 receptions for 43 yards. He had a total of 17.9 fantasy points. Big start for JD McKissick. Johnny, did you happen to have any of these guys within your lineups?
I did. I did. I had JD McKissick in there. So obviously I was happy that he did as well as he did last week. He had, yeah, like you said, 8 carries for only 6 yards, but I mean, he was targeted 15 times. And as a running back, you love to see that, especially in a PPR league. So again, yeah, I was very excited that I started him.
Yeah, when you have Alex Smith just checking the ball down, and he's going to be doing that as a game manager, JD McKissick is a very good option. He's definitely the receiving back there. Antonio Gibson is still there as well. He had a pretty good game from what I, believe. But JD McKissick, pretty good start. How about your guys that you said to sit?
Yeah, so I had a pretty good week guessing who to sit this week. So we'll start off in Buffalo. Devin Singletary, it's not looking great for him. I think I said that last week too. I think it's finally Zach Moss's field now. I think, let's see what Devin had. He had 4 carries, 15 yards. He was targeted 5 times, which is actually surprising. He's usually not targeted that much, but he only had 1 reception, and that 1 reception was for -5 yards. So it really didn't do much. He scored 2 fantasy points, which is unreal. I'm glad I benched him in all my leagues that I did have him. But like I said, yeah, I think it's going to be Zach Moss's field for now on for the rest of the season.
That was a pretty good decision there to sit Devin Singletary. I was pretty surprised when they drafted Zach Moss because they had Singletary, but now it's kind of looking like it's going to be his team moving forward. Yeah, the 1 reception for -5 yards, that's very disappointing, and only scoring 2 points. But how about your next guy there that you had on your list?
Yeah, next guy going up my New Orleans Saints, it was Jerick McKinnon. Again, he didn't do so hot. I think he did get injured. I'm not too sure about that, but he did have 18 carries for only 33 yards, which is great for me. Obviously, he was targeted 3 times, only had 1 reception for 13 yards, so not a bad reception there. But ultimately, only scoring 5.6 fantasy points. That 49ers team, it's not looking great with all the injuries. I think I said that last week as well, but just with all those injuries, it's really slowing them down, and it's definitely hurting that rushing game there.
Yeah, with the injury that you were saying about Jerick McKinnon, it said that he had suffered a stinger late in the game, and he had a bigger workload definitely that previous game against the Saints there. But the Saints being the number one run defense, definitely a struggle for running backs that play them. So looking at some of the guys that I was saying to start for the wide receivers, this is Corey Davis against the Indianapolis Colts. He had a pretty decent game. It was kind of tough for Corey Davis personally. Heading into the game, his brother had actually just passed away from cancer a day before the game had occurred. And Corey Davis, he decided to play for his brother because that's something that his brother would have wanted, and his brother was a big fan. Corey Davis was targeted 6 times. He had 5 receptions for 67 yards. He scored 11.7 fantasy points. Just a pretty good game for Corey Davis, and what he was going through. He did pretty well in my eyes there for having that emotional baggage over his head there. We're hoping the best for Corey Davis moving forward and for his family. The next guy that I had on my start list, it was a big one, Mike Evans versus the Carolina Panthers. He was targeted 11 times, which was most on the team. He caught 6 passes for 77 yards, and he had a TD. His total points scored was 19.70 points. Big rebound game for Mr. Mike Evans there.
Yeah, 100%. I watched that game for most of it. And like we said, Brady was going to bounce back, and he did. I think most of the receivers on that team actually did really well with Evans, Godwin, Brown, and I think Gronk had a TD in there too. So they all looked really good against the Panthers, but I'm really glad to see Mike Evans finally stepping up to that wide receiver one type material again. So it was really nice to see him getting targeted that many times.
Yeah, it's awesome to see that. And even with Antonio Brown on the team, like I noticed Brady was kind of going to him a bit for here and there, but Mike Evans was coming up with the big plays on the team just to move the chains and everything, get the offense going. But how about your guys for the sitting for the wide receiver position?
Same thing with my running backs. I had a decent, well, actually, one of them plays tonight, but Devontae Parker was my one that did play yesterday. He was targeted 7 times, only 2 receptions for 31 yards, totaling 5.1 fantasy points. So obviously, that was a good sit. Obviously, you'd expect with Williams out there, Parker was going to step it up a little bit more, but it didn't look like that. He only had those 2 receptions, so that definitely hurt him. But Adam Thielen was my other sit. We'll see in about an hour or so how he does against those Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to how he does against the Bears. You're kind of on fire right now with these benches going on, but looking at the guys that I'm saying to start from last week, it's just getting worse and worse for me. So I said to start alongside with Melvin Gordon of the Broncos to start Noah Fant versus Las Vegas Raiders. And with Drew Lock and his horrendous game and the 5 turnovers that he had, Noah Fant had 3 receptions for 18 yards. He was targeted 7 times. It was the third most on the team. He had a total of 4.8 fantasy points. Not a good start for Noah Fant at all. And then the other guy that I had was Ross Dwelly of the 49ers and going against the New Orleans Saints. He only had 1 reception for 22 yards. He was targeted 2 times in the game and scored a total of 3.2 fantasy points. Watching some of the highlights from that game and from the tight end position, kind of looks like it's going to be Jordan Reed's team moving forward and filling in for Kittle in that role. So definitely do not consider Ross Dwelly for starting at a 49ers unless Jordan Reed is injured.
Yeah, you hit it right on the money there. I think, you know what? I think they did split a little bit of time yesterday, but I think Jordan Reed did have more snaps there. I'm not sure if you watched that game or not, but he did make a really, really nice one-handed catch. But yeah, like you said, I think it's going to be Reed's field for at least now, unless there's more injuries that happen. But like you said, I think I'd stay away from Ross Dwelly on that waiver wire.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
mean,
moving on to my tight end sits of the week. One of them was really great. One of them was really bad. Let's start off with my St. Jared Cook. That was a bad game. He got targeted 2 times, no receptions, no rushing yards, no anything. Scored a big goose egg, 0 points. So that was obviously a great sit for me against that tough 49ers D. Secondly, Rob Gronkowski against those Carolina Panthers. He did well. He had only 2 receptions, but those 2 receptions totaled into 51 total yards. He was targeted 3 times, but had those 2 receptions and 1 touchdown as well. So he ended up getting 13.1 fantasy points. Without that touchdown, would have been right around 7 points or so, but he did end up getting that touchdown. So that was a bad sit for me. But did you check that game out?
yeah, I was watching the Bucks and Carolina Panthers game, and I was kind of rooting for you the whole way with the Rob Gronkowski pick there because he wasn't getting much action, and then next thing you know, Tom Brady throws that beautiful touchdown pass to him, and I was kind of like, "Ooh, man, that's gonna hurt the stats for your for the bench players that you were saying." But you kind of hit the money there with the Jared Cook pick. Very very good and on fire there. The defense that I had is the Minnesota Vikings versus Chicago. So we'll happen to see that tonight. And hopefully that's a good outcome for my starts there. But who did you have for your bench?
For my benches, I had that Tampa Bay defense, obviously from the week before, coming off that huge blowout from the Saints. I wasn't expecting them to do as well against Carolina. They did allow 23 points. They allowed 3 sacks, 1 interception. They also had 2 fourth down stops. So they ended up getting 7 points. I think they were projected around that as well. So obviously not great, but it wasn't horrible. So it was right in the middle.
Yeah, it's not that bad at all. It's definitely split. Scoring 7 points. It's pretty decent for a defense. And then you have some defense that just go, absolutely insane with scoring points and getting the big touchdowns and things like that. And then there's some that just underproduce completely. And next thing you know, you're scoring negative points. But definitely that was a pretty good selection there from you to who to sit. Very bad for me to decide on who to start. So it's a good thing we're going to switch those around for week 11. But some of the key injuries that happened over the weekend, like I was saying it earlier, Drew Lock with the injury, he has kind of a chance to play in week 11. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And wide receiver Tyler Lockett, this one was a big surprise to me. MCL sprain, he's kind of going to be out for maybe 1 to 2 weeks. So we'll kind of evaluate that. And who are some of the other guys you had there for the key injuries there?
Yeah, so two quarterbacks, both Saint and former Saint Drew Brees obviously got rocked there in the second quarter. It came out today that he does have about 5, possibly 6 fractured ribs and a collapsed lung. So he's not looking too great, most likely out for the rest of the season, possibly back for the playoffs, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see how he heals. Secondly, Teddy Bridgewater did get tackled there around the knees, and obviously he did get a big knee injury before his career really took off last year. So it's really scary to see that, but it's not looking too serious, which is very thankful. So he does have a shot to play in Week 11.
Yeah, I heard with Teddy Bridgewater's like knee injury, it was luckily it wasn't the same knee that he tore up that one year when he was with the Vikings. So that's good news, but hopefully they're able to bounce back and all these guys are able to recover and they're available within the next few weeks. So looking at, some of the guys that we're saying to start and sit for week 11, who do you have for starting at the quarterback position?
First off, I'm going to start with a Miami Dolphin, Tua Tagovailoa against the Denver Broncos. So far, Tua's undefeated in a Dolphins uniform, so it's obviously looking like a decent start. Denver's not a great team, so I think Tua can do some damage there. He did pretty well against the Chargers on home turf last week against the Chargers, threw for 169 yards, which isn't too great, but he did have 2 passing touchdowns, so it brings up those fantasy points. Broncos defense is okay. They're right in the middle of the pack for allowing yards, averaging around 231 passing yards per game. So they are also the 10th worst in the league in rushing defense. So we know Tua can scramble if needed. Most likely won't. He likes to stay in the pocket and throw those balls to his receivers, but he will scramble if needed, like I said. Secondly, we're going to go to Big Ben at Jacksonville. So obviously the Steelers are 9-0. They're on fire. He had his best game of the week last week against Cincinnati, scoring 37.32 fantasy points, which is insane. He threw for 333 yards, 4 passing touchdowns. So he went off, as I said, going up against the Jaguars. They are pretty terrible. I think they I don't know, 1-7 or 1-8. Third worst in the league for a defense against QBs. And like I said, they're undefeated, so it should be an easy matchup for them. But who knows? Like we saw last week, the Jets almost beat the Patriots, so it could be a surprise, but I don't think it will be. So I think Big Ben is definitely a safe start for this week.
Yeah, those are pretty good quarterback options you have there, Johnny, for week 11. Big Ben, going against Jacksonville, he uh, hasn't really played all that well against Jacksonville in recent years, but this Jacksonville defense is not the same as it was when it carried Blake Bortles to the playoffs and when we went to the AFC championship game. This Jacksonville defense is definitely not the same, and Big Ben will definitely get his revenge for all those times Jacksonville has squandered their season. And with Tua going against Denver, like you said, Tua undefeated so far this year. He's been playing absolutely amazing, and everyone kind of forgot about who Ryan Fitzmagic was. It's kind of good 2 options you have there for quarterbacks to start. 2 of the guys that I said to bench for this upcoming week, looking at number 1 quarterback is of the Los Angeles Rams, Jared Goff, going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Looking into Jared Goff's numbers from last year when he played against Tampa Bay, he was 45 for 68. He had 517 passing yards, 2 TDs. However, he did have 3 interceptions. He was sacked 2 times, and he had 1 fumble lost. It was kind of like crazy game statistically for Jared Goff, but kind of looking at last week's game, he against the Seattle Seahawks and being the number one defense against quarterbacks. He was kind of projected to do absolutely amazing and just didn't. So, Tampa's defense from last year has improved overall, and they're currently ranked in the middle of the pack passing defense of 18th overall. However, this defense has 17 takeaways, which is tied for first place in the league. And like we said earlier in the podcast a few weeks ago, that the Bucks defense is one of the most blitzing teams in the NFL. They have 32 sacks on the year, which is second in the NFL. They have 73 quarterback hits, 59 tackles for a loss. They're ranked eighth in scoring defense, allowing 22.6 points, and they allow a quarterback rating of 89.8. So this matchup, Jared Goff going against Tampa Bay, and after coming off that game against Seattle, not a good look. They'll probably, do the same thing with running the ball, but we'll see how things go. So Jared Goff is my first bench for Week 11. And then the second quarterback I have is Baker Mayfield against the Philadelphia Eagles. So ever since OBJ went down with that torn ACL injury and Baker threw for the 5 TDs, he has been playing pretty mediocre in the recent weeks. Week 8 against the Las Vegas Raiders in Cleveland, Baker Mayfield was 12 for 25. He had 122 yards, 6 carries for 29 yards, a QB rating of 62.4. He scored a total of 6.97 fantasy points. I will never forget that game because I started him for that week. And then last week against the Texans, Baker was 12 for 20. He had 132 yards. He had 3 rushes for 1 yard. He was sacked once, and he had a QBR of 79.6. He scored a total of 4 points. Now, the kind of a weather factor in this is that the wind for that Week 8 game against the Raiders was 35 miles per hour, and the wind last week against the Texans was 25 miles per hour. Kind of looking at the forecast, for this game coming up, the wind is supposed to be 13 miles per hour, so it's definitely a lot easier for Baker Mayfield to throw the ball through the air. But this is the third time playing Cleveland. Definitely keep an eye on that weather as a factor. And the Eagles defense overall are ranked 5th against the pass. They've only given up 13 passing TDs this year. And the Browns offensively have been pretty horrendous in the passing game, as they're ranked 30th overall with only 1,699 yards thrown. They have 16 TDs and 7 interceptions so far this year. So Baker Mayfield is my sit against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, it's a good point bringing in the weather as a factor. That was pretty wild on Sunday. I think I sent you the video of when the anthem was going on. That huge hailstorm came through. That was wild. So the game had to be delayed for that. But yeah, like I said, it's a good idea bringing that in, because who knows? Cleveland, they obviously don't look good throwing the ball. So with winds that are higher, it might throw them off.
Yeah, and with Nick Chubb coming back, he's healthy. The run game is kind of back in business. The Browns had 41 rushing attempts total, and it was 19 between Chubb or 19 carries for Chubb and 19 for Kareem Hunt. Mayfield had 3, and they ran for 231 yards. So it looks like that's kind of the game plan moving forward. And Baker Mayfield is kind of in that Kirk Cousins role there because of Kevin Stefanski coming from Minnesota. So yeah, that's kind of why I'm saying to bench Baker Mayfield against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like you said, with Chubb and Hunt fully healthy again, I think their game plan is going to go back to normal with all of that running. Why not when you have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt? They're probably the best 2 RBs in the league for that division. So, like I said, why not go for it?
Yeah, exactly. They're the best like 1-2 punch in the league. Probably the best backfield. So definitely looking for them to game plan around those two. Who are your 2 guys that you're saying to start for the wide receivers?
All right, so this is gonna be a risky one. I know you're not gonna like it. I know I didn't like it last week. First off, we're gonna say Emmanuel Sanders. So he's coming off of his worst game of the season. Unfortunately, I had to learn that the hard way by starting him and AJ Brown on the same team. So they scored, I think, about 4.6 points combined. So I took an L this week. Anyways, he had one catch for 5 yards. It was on like the 5 yard line too. So if he could have got in that end zone, it would have been perfect. But he didn't. But anyways, looking back at week 2, he did have a bad game then. In week 3, he did have a bounce back game, putting in 15.6 points compared to his 2.8 in week 2. So I'm hoping he can have a bounce back game here. So let's hope, obviously. Brees is out, so that's going to hurt the receiving game a little bit. We'll obviously see how Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill do with those passing yards, but we'll see. They're going up against a Falcons defense, who are one of the worst behind the Cowboys and the Seahawks for passing. At least they allow over 300 passing yards a game. So we'll see what Winston does with his receivers.
Yeah, it will definitely be interesting to see that. And I have Emmanuel Sanders, and I started him last week against the 49ers, and it was pretty bad. So, I that's pretty good. Convincing that you have there with me wanting to start him again and put him in my lineup. I'll definitely have to decide as things move along with that quarterback situation. And yeah, Jacoby Myers, he's kind of emerged ever since Julian Edelman has been injured. So definitely some two pretty good wide receivers you have there.
Yeah, Myers is looking like Cam's number one receiver, recording 5 receptions on 7 targets last week against those Ravens. He did actually have a throwing passing touchdown as well. So that was pretty wild to see to Rex Burkhead there, a 24-yarder. So he's looking better than Cam, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the wide receivers I have to sit instead, last week I did say to start him was Mike Evans. And because of DK Metcalf going against Jalen Ramsey is going to want, to go against Mike Evans. They're two very physical individuals, and this is going to be a good matchup for the Rams and Bucks. So I'm going to say to bench Mike Evans this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. DK Metcalf against Jalen Ramsey, he only had 2 receptions for 28 yards. He had 4 targets, and for majority of the game, Jalen Ramsey had him on lock. So definitely that's something that I want to keep an eye out for, and maybe bench Mike Evans for this week. And Brady will probably target more so Antonio Brown, Gronk, and Chris Godwin. So bench Mike Evans this week against Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
I hope you're on with that because I love Mike Evans over there on the Bucks offense. Obviously, I have him in one of my leagues, so I hope you're wrong. But like you said, you never know.
Yeah, and the next guy that I'm gonna say to bench for Week 11 is going to be Jerry Jeudy. Just for obvious reasons, going against the Miami Dolphins, they got some pretty good corners there in Miami, and with how Drew Lock played last week, and with the potential of him sitting out against the Dolphins, it's just going to be completely one-sided affair. So definitely sit Jerry Jeudy. He might be good for PPR just because of, if the Miami Dolphins get too far ahead, the quarterback will just be throwing the ball out, potential times for targets if you get points based on targets in your league. But Jerry Jeudy, I can't see him making a big impact in the game for yards or making a TD grab against this Miami Dolphins defense. They're very good against the pass, very good all around secondary. So definitely sit Jerry Jeudy for Week 11.
Yeah, he's definitely a questionable sit for sure. He's very trendy. I think 2 weeks ago he went off for over 100 yards, and last week he did okay, but not great. So going up that against that Dolphins defense, they've been looking solid this season. So I think you're onto something with that Judy sit.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't want to have an outing like I did for last week with who to start. So glad I'm doing the benching for this week.
Exactly. I think sits are a little easier, but I guess we'll see what happens next week.
Yeah,
All right, let's move
who are your
on
running backs
to
there?
running backs. First off, we're going to start with Ezekiel Elliott. It's kind of strange that I'm even mentioning him in a start and sit segment, but it's 2020, so anything can happen.
That's a big
After
surprise. Yeah.
Dak Prescott went down in week 5, he hasn't really looked the same. He's only scored 37.3 fantasy points in those games since then, while he averaged in the first 4 weeks close to 25 points per game. So obviously he's not himself. No one's really themselves on that Cowboys offense. They're coming off of a bye week, so maybe he just needed a bit of chill time. You never know. But they're going against a Vikings run defense who is okay. They allow on average 125 rushing yards per game. So if he's included in the receiving game as well as the rushing game, he might have that game that we've all been waiting for him to have since week 4.
Wow. Ezekiel Elliott to start. That is absolutely insane.
Yeah, I never thought I'd say that, but yeah, like I said, it's 2020. It's a strange year. So moving on. Secondly, DeAndre Swift, he's finally looking like that number one back in Detroit. Had his first career start this week against the Redskins, did not disappoint. Career game with 25.9 fantasy points, rushed 16 times for 81 yards, caught all 5 targets for 68 yards, plus a receiving touchdown. Next week, they're going up against the Carolina Panthers, who we saw the Buccaneers destroy this week. They do have the top 5 worst defense for rushing, on average 124 yards per game. So again, if Swift is used in that receiving game plus the rushing game, I'd expect him to have at least 15 plus points. He has scored over 28 points in 2 games, so he's looking like a really good start.
Yeah, DeAndre Swift has been a monster as he's taken over the lead back role there in Detroit, and I'm kind of now regretting my decision to not trade for him earlier this year or even draft him. I was kind of like, I got Dobbins and I got Clyde Edwards-Helaire for my rookie running backs. I don't need a third one, but DeAndre Swift would have been a good pick if I had drafted him when my brothers were saying to. Unfortunately, I didn't. So that's kind of haunting at me right now. And when I had the chance to trade for him, I didn't take it. But looking at some of the running backs that I would say to sit for week 11, my first guy, Duke Johnson versus New England. With David Johnson on IR, it's kind of obvious that Duke Johnson is the number one back in Houston. But over the past 2 games, Duke has kind of averaged 15 carries. He's had 95 rush yards and 1 touchdown. New England is ranked 23rd against the run, but they've only allowed 8 rushing TDs, which is ranked 11th overall in the league. And also in this offense, Duke Johnson hasn't really made himself a reliable option in the passing game. After taking over the number one role over the 2 weeks, he's only had 5 receptions for 32 yards. So Duke Johnson is definitely not really a factor in the offense for the Houston Texans. Deshaun's slicing and dicing the ball and distributing out to Brandon Cooks and, Will Fuller. So those guys are kind of going to be more of the receiver on the receiving end, and Deshaun Watson isn't really looking for Duke Johnson as a check down, back there. And the next guy I have is Todd Gurley going against New Orleans. So this is kind of an interesting matchup due to the fact of Drew Brees' rib injury. And it's kind of looking like maybe the Saints would rely more so on Kamara throughout the game, and keeping the ball away from the Atlanta Falcons. With their healthy offense. So I'm kind of expecting Gurley to not really have a big impact this game. The Saints are also ranked first against the run. They've only allowed 76.8 yards per game and 5 TDs this year. And looking at Gurley's overall career against New Orleans, he's averaged 14 carries, 63 yards per game, and he's only scored 2 touchdowns against the Saints. So he hasn't really put himself out there, to score and dominate against the New Orleans Saints. And Atlanta averages 106.8 rush yards per game, which is ranked 18th in the league. They're ranked 30th in rushing yards per average with 3.7. So just numerically, this is definitely a game to sit Todd Gurley against the Saints, with them being number one against the run, like I said earlier. So definitely sit Todd Gurley and Duke Johnson for week 11.
Yeah, like you said with Todd Gurley, I think in that Atlanta offense, it's definitely a throw the ball type offense for sure. And like with the Saints run defense being one of the best in the league, I don't think they're going to use Todd too much. I think they're going to go to Julio. If Calvin Ridley's back, they're going to go to Calvin. So I think that's a great sit. Same thing with Duke Johnson. With David Johnson on the IR, Duke Johnson is that number one back in Houston. but he didn't look great last week. I don't think he's really going to do anything against New England with their tough defense. So I think those are two very solid sits for this week.
Thank you. I'm really happy you said that.
Of course.
Now, who are some of your tight ends to start?
All right, tight ends to start. Let's start off in Detroit with TJ Hawkinson. TJ is coming off of his worst game of the season, but that could be because of Matt Stafford's injury in that game with his thumb. They definitely used Swift a lot more with the rushing after that injury occurred. But if Stafford is back and ready to go for week 11, I think TJ is a very reliable option. TJ only put out 3.3 points last week with 4 targets and 2 receptions for a total of 13 yards. He's definitely seen an increase in work since his rookie season last season. He has 5 receiving touchdowns this year, so that's obviously very good for a tight end. And going up against a decent Panthers team, they're averaging around 255 passing yards per game. And if Galladay is back next week for week 11, that'll definitely take less coverage off of Hawkinson so that he could potentially take over that offense next week.
Yeah, TJ Hawkinson. I really wish I was able to, get him. He's been a really good tight end this year in fantasy.
All right, next up for my tight end, I'm going to say another Saint. I love my Saints. As you can probably tell, Anthony,
Oh
I'm going
yeah,
to say Jared Cook. I know I said sit him last week, and it was a great decision. So I'm hoping when I say start him this week, it's going to be another good decision. Going up against that 49ers defense last week, though, obviously very tough against the tight ends. I think they're third best for coverage for fantasy wise so far this season. So in week 11, when they do go against those Falcons defense, obviously I like that matchup. Falcons, again, not great with the passing game. So I think Winston's definitely going to use him a lot in the red zone. So obviously I'd like to see him get a touchdown. But I think otherwise he's definitely a good start for this week.
yeah. I'm surprised you have Jared Cook as well in your starts when you have Emmanuel Sanders as well. So you're kind of banking on, the Saints to distribute the ball out to all their guys and kind of having the offense click as it usually does, right?
I sure hope so. Same thing with the Lions, how I had Swift and Hawkinson. I hope they do
Mhm.
well together. But yeah, let's see.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see how things go with that. And for tight ends that I said to sit for week 11, I got tight end Mike Gesicki against the Denver Broncos. Mike Gesicki has been kind of mediocre since Tua Tagovailoa took over the starting job. His targets per game has gone up slowly, but he hasn't been able to find the end zone. Over the last 4 games, Gesicki has been targeted 13 times. He's caught 6 of those targets for 90 yards and 0 touchdowns. The last time that he scored was back in week 3 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Kind of a long time from now, now that we're going into week 11. So it's kind of, diminished to a bit of his fantasy value. And the Denver Broncos have only given up uh, an average of 5.9 points to tight ends this year, which is ranked 8th in the NFL. And they've only given up 2 TDs. Uh, you know, Last week I did have Darren Waller starting against the Denver Broncos, and just for an example, his numbers, he only had 3 receptions for 37 yards, a total of 6.7 fantasy points. So, with Mike Gesicki uh, in the Miami offense, definitely a sit against the Denver Broncos. The next guy I have is Dalton Schultz against the Minnesota Vikings. He's been a pretty decent tight end this year. And even though they've had the multiple QBs coming into play for the Cowboys, the Vikings defense have only given up 38 receptions this year to tight ends and only 3 touchdowns. Schultz, like Mike Gesicki, only has two TDs this year. Definitely, sit option for these tight ends. Dalton Schultz, tight end Mike Gesicki, definitely sit them for week 11.
Yeah, I completely agree with those two. First off, with Mike Gesicki there. If Denver can shut down Darren Waller, then I'm pretty sure they can shut down Gesicki. Like you said, he hasn't scored since week 3, I think you said. So he's not looking too great. I know Tua is looking around more so as receivers. And again, with Dalton Schultz, that whole Cowboys offense is terrible. there's really no reliable option there. Amari Cooper's not looking great. CD Lamb's not looking good. Gallup has pretty much been erased from fantasy since the beginning of the year. So I like those sits for sure.
Thank you. I'm very happy with that. Who do you have for your defense to start?
But defense to start, not much to say with this one. The LA Chargers at home against the New York Jets. It's the New York Jets. I'm hoping the Chargers can put up at least 8 points on that defense. But yeah, I really don't have many stats to say here. It's the New York Jets.
Round of applause to you, man. That is awesome because I have the Chargers in our fantasy league, and I'm definitely going to start them against the Jets.
You should.
Like you said, no, not much to say there for that reason. I'm kind of
Exactly.
amped up about that.
Exactly. Who do you got for your defense to sit?
I'm saying to sit the Denver Broncos defense against the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins, they're able to create turnovers. They put up a lot of points easily, and they just use a reduced, field to just get down there, drive, and score. Last week this defense in our league they gave up -3 fantasy points. I don't know how scoring works for other leagues there, but I think they had scored 3 points, in some standard leagues. They gave up 357 yards and 4 rushing TDs. Drew Lock, having his 5 turnovers, as we stated earlier, didn't really help out his defense at all. And, going against the Miami Dolphins, they've created 15 turnovers, which is ranked 7th overall in the league. If they're going against Drew Lock or the backup, you just know that defense is going to, just really make an impact in the game, make it easier for the offense to just put up points and score. So definitely is a good reason to sit the Denver Broncos defense against the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, that's a very good option for sure. I think, like I said, Tua's been going off, so it's definitely a risky start for against that Miami offense.
Yeah, definitely. That kind of wraps up everything for our 4th episode of the podcast. Is there anything else you want to say, Johnny?
I think we covered it all. Let's hope we bang out these sits and starts for the week, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, good luck to everybody out there this upcoming week 11. Definitely give us a follow on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. It's FF in the 6. We, continue to do these episodes and release them on Tuesdays. So hopefully you guys give us a listen, subscribe, follow, definitely tweet at us, message us. We're definitely here to help you guys out and, conquer your leagues and make you come in first place. So thank you all for listening. Take care and hope you have a great day.